when we talk about careers in HR, there's generally a divide between those in a generalist role and those in a specialist role. And generalists tend to work in the HR department, which handles many different functions of human resource management. So that those functions can include planning and documenting of job information, recruiting, selection, training, including things like onboarding and compliance training that must be done to be compliant with laws, performance management, compensation and benefits. And so oftentimes when there is an HR department, and most organizations have HR departments, they tend to have generalists. Now, especially when it's a small organization, if you're working in HR, you tend to be in a generalist type of role. You tend to be responsible for what we think of as a portfolio of different responsibilities. And what I have listed there is kind of what I've seen as a typical kind of hierarchy in terms of different positions for HR. There's often people start through an internship, and the first kind of full-time position is usually a person who's got an HR assistant position. You may from there move on to a coordinator or a specialist type of role where you kind of manage or work on the functions in one area. A step up from that is an HR manager. And then when you start getting into more executive type ranks, you've got HR director, VP of human resources. In some instances in organizations, they have someone in HR in the C-suite or the chief executive officers. You've probably heard of the CEO, who's the chief executive officer, or maybe the COO, which is the chief operations officer, or the CFO, which is the chief financial officer. But in some organizations, they have a CHRO, which is the chief human resource officer. In many organizations, they have more specialized roles, and you see them particularly in specific areas like recruiting, compensation, benefits, payroll. Sometimes the learning and development is a specialized area. I worked for a while heading up the professional development at a community college, and I had my own little department that was specialized in that. Sometimes there are jobs specialized in labor relations. In particular, when we talk about labor relations, we're talking about managing the relationships with unions. And so oftentimes those people are what we consider a contract administrator. They have to know the union contract very well. It makes sure that it's administered appropriately from the organization's perspective, and they may be involved with things like negotiations or grievance processes and things like that. More and more with technology being important in all organizations, it's increasingly important in HR. And so you see specialized roles in HR analytics. And we've seen increasingly specialization in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, making sure that there is equal opportunity in organizations, making sure there's plans that are enforced to make the workforce representative of the diversity that exists in the community. And so In these specialized roles, oftentimes there is some degree of hierarchy depending, on how large the organization is. Again, if you're in a smaller organization and you have a specialist role, you may be a department of one and be responsible for all aspects of recruiting or all aspects of payroll. But in larger organizations, you might have a staff where there might be an assistant, you might have a couple managers or a coordinator. Typically, if you're heading up, it's going to be a director level, but in some instances, you might even see vice presidents. I've seen VPs of diversity, equity, inclusion increasingly. When I think about, my career progress, careers need to be something that are intentional. It can be difficult because organizations change so quickly. Maybe sometime in the past, it was just you got into an organization and you climbed steadily up that level from intern to assistant to manager to director to VP. But those direct career paths are not as common anymore. And so I found this figure on the internet, and I've got the site where I got it from at the bottom of the slide. But I thought it was interesting because I think it highlights a lot of the things you have to think about in planning your career. And first and foremost, I think we have to be intentional about our careers. We'd like to think that we're all so talented that, once we get in a job, they're going to come to us and say, hey, you're high potential. We're going to put you on the fast track. We want you to be part of our group of young leaders. And that may happen to some people, but what I see in most people who are ambitious and get ahead is they have intentions about how to advance in their career. And so I think we have to be very intentional and have a career plan. But in doing that, we have to think about a lot of different things. And part of it starts with your personal situation. What do you want out of a career? You may not want to be the vice president of human resource management. You might be very happy in a specialized role where you do something like training and development that you get, feel rewarded from doing, or you might feel very comfortable in working in compensation and benefits. It might provide you with a good income, but not be so demanding that it requires you to work a lot more than 40 hours a week. So I think you've got to think about that personal situation. And at the same time, while we might aspire to things, we have to be aware of what is the marketplace and is there a demand? What are the opportunities that exist? Labor in part can be a commodity. We are selling our time and our expertise, but there's got to be a buyer for that. And the one thing that we often do is we specialize, we get more expertise. That means that our skills are more scarce. And so that's one reason to differentiate yourself and increase your skills. You may, want to look at things like compensation. Is it really worth your time to develop those skills? We all, want to think about, having a career as being personally rewarding, but it's also about paying the rent and paying the utilities and, getting those financial means to live the life that you want to live. Ultimately, as we advance, and I'll talk more about this later, we advance through our skills and how we can sell our knowledge and skills and ability and have those experiences and those competencies be things that persuade people to give us those jobs. And so I think it's very important that, we investigate, what are the skills that are needed for me to progress in my career. And in doing so, we often may need to advocate for ourselves. That could be through conversations we have with our supervisors or our mentors. Many times during a performance management process, that might be part of the conversation. We may want to be aware of changes that are happening in the organization. Where are those job opportunities, both inside the organization and outside the organization? One thing that I found is that if I want to increase my salary, the best place for me to do it is at a different place than I'm working now. Generally, the biggest salary increases I've gotten is through resigning from one organization and taking a job at another. So when we think about career planning, it's not just saying, hey, I want this role in a year, I want this next role in 5 years. We really have to think about all of these different factors and prepare ourselves.